Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 66th Think Tank, where we brainstorm RPG ideas from character sheets to monsters to gaming styles, whatever crosses our mind. Tonight, the subject is how far is too far. So we're just general discussion about, you know, what are the limits of what we're prepared to role play? What are our own experiences when people have taken it to the edge, or possibly taking it over the edge in acceptable behaviour, or what we were personally comfortable with. So that's what we're going to be discussing. But before we do that, I'm going to hand over to Pat, who's going to do some check-ins. Pat, you're muted.
That is my check-in. Okay, so I'll go from my left. So Chris, how has your week been? What have you been up to? Chris, you're muted.
I pressed the button. Yes, it's been not a bad week. Sort of got some stuff done, got some progress on the 66 Hellenic artwork, a video we've got planned, so I've sort of laid the groundwork to that, and hopefully in the next few days we'll be sending stuff out saying if you're an artist, if you're a video editor, we want you to get in touch and see whether we can work together. So more of that next week, but yeah, good week.
Okay, we'll go from left to right. So my next is Josh Radford. How have you been this week?
It's been a show at work, so I've been going back and forth between the officers, giving instead of having to send it out via post, I've been giving some of the customers the orders directly. So I've been like a bit of a go for this week, so I'm absolutely shattered. Other than that, I can't really complain. It's starting to warm up a lot. Yeah, today was actually quite a nice day. Probably the nicest day we've had in about 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah.
And Mark, you arrived just in time for the check-ins, so check in.
I know, best timing ever. Yes, I arrived because I just got back in from work because I was preparing some things to take to Italy for a customer on Monday afternoon, and then I broke them, or discovered that I'd broken them at 6 o'clock on Friday evening. So that's my weekend planned. So yeah, that's basically me. Stuff gone wrong, must now fix.
Okay, well that was Mark, although of course the best time ever is at the start. I, as you can see, have had surgery to make myself into a Na'vi from Avatar. That was what happened my week. No, I've just been very busy at work as well. I got paid today, so I bought myself a new webcam. It's not what I hoped for. All right. So, since it's a bit of a different kind of format from last week, do I pass to Chris, or do we keep going? Okay, well, pass on to Chris.
Yes, thank you, Pat. So yes, how far is too far? What do you consider appropriate at your gaming table? Do you sort of like do detailed gore? Do you involve sex? Do you involve controversial subjects and explore interesting topics? You know, things like racism and gender roles. Do you play psychological games on your players? Do you take things which are from out of the game and bring them into the game to mess with people's heads? You know, just how far do you go? And it's just going to be a general discussion tonight. We're just going to be talking about, you know, our experiences, things we've done, games we've played in, times when maybe we've gone too far or not far enough. So that's really the subject for tonight. So open discussion. Everyone just unmute their mics and chip in as appropriate. But what I'd like is, so tell me about a game where you have gone too far, where you personally were uncomfortable with what was happening. So just, I don't know, when you did something and no one said, no one spoke.
I have to sorry.
No, go on, Pat.
I have to think the worst thing. I tend to dial it back a bit when I play, which actually I think might diminish me as a GM. But I think the worst thing I ever had happen was in a game of Slay Industries, actually, which some people here are familiar with and will know. In Slay, you don't question anything. I had a group of street youths that they came across who were using a cat as a football. I really felt uncomfortable running that, but it sort of had to be done. I had to get a rise out of people, but yeah, I don't know. As I said, I tend to like Josh. You seem to be more interesting than me.
The last thing I did, which completely freaked out my players, was the introduction of something called the Flesh Slave. People can hear me, can't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was an introduction of called the Flesh Slave. Now, in my campaign, they're currently dealing with a bad guy known as Garius Margul the Flayer. He is able to basically surgically modify people, become puppets, essentially. Now, the way I ran it was, if you imagine them walking towards the party out of the dark with very jerky movements while chanting the mantra, flay the skin, cut the flesh, over and over. So they get into a fight, and they start dropping them, because I mean, they're commoners. They're literally commoners who have been turned into these walking puppets. So I mentioned that they've all wearing these like bandanas across their faces, and they've got blood dripping underneath them. And they get into fight, and they grapple the last one. And one of them goes, all right, I'm going to go to one of the dead ones, and I'm going to take the bandana away and see what happens. And underneath was just a hole. There was nothing. There was just a hole where their face was, apart from the lower bit, of course. No brain either. You can see right back to the back of the skull. Maybe a few bits of brain left on the spine for motor control and whatnot. At which point I didn't know that one of my players has a complete aversion to anything to do with the brain. And it's like, oh, I didn't know that in advance. Whoops. But the bit which freaked them out the most is, as that happens, for anybody who's seen The Thing, they know that when the thing makes a screeching noise, it's one of the most horrific things they've ever put to audio. So I started saying, oh, and by the way, they start making this noise. And at this point, I'd hope nobody's seen The Thing, because I would have ruined the moment. I started playing it, and they all start freaking out. And then I said, oh, everyone roll perception. Those who passed notice that the ones on the floor are doing it as well. The ones that are supposed to be dead.
See, that's brilliant, though. I don't know if that's going too far. I think that's just effectively doing horror.
It's more the point that I looked over at my... this was a new player, the one I'd only just met like 2 or 3 weeks beforehand. I didn't know her that well. So I started doing the scene, and you could just see her all just scrunched up afterwards, like that, going, oh.
That's when you look at
I mean, that's kind of a key part of doing horror kind of games, because you do need that body horror. Because I've been playing a vampire game every month for the last couple of years now, and the GM insists, or ST insists, on doing very vivid descriptions of wounds.
Yeah.
So it's not just you stab him, he loses 20 hit points. You stab him, and then the blood comes out and the viscera, and he does all of that stuff. Now, I just like to see that as part of the game, and I don't mind that. And I've not found a limit myself yet on the amount of gore in the description. I've not reached a limit on that. But one of the other players really does struggle with it. She's actually had to leave the room before now with that kind of thing. So in terms of GMing, I think actually he's pushing it a bit too far, because he actually kind of almost excludes someone from the game a bit when doing that, and has actually been asked to turn it back, and says that he hasn't, and says that he won't.
I think that both your experience, Mark, and Josh's experience demonstrates one of the dangers of role-playing, and about going too far, is that everybody has different definition of what is too far.
Yeah.
And it's very important to, when you've got new players, that you talk about your style of gaming, and also give them a chance, to give them the confidence that they can speak up, so if they do feel comfortable. If someone says someone's being made uncomfortable, they should be able to say, I don't like this, can we tone it down, move on, whatever's appropriate. And I think Mark, you're right. I think if a GM is doing something which is deliberately upsetting another player, and they say excluding them from the game, I've got serious question marks about whether a GM should be doing that.
Yeah, I think. See, in other respects, he's fantastic, but with that one, because he insists that the vampire is a game of bodily horror, that it's something that should just kind of be expected and you shouldn't have to worry about it. But yeah, I think in that case, I think there's a medium to be reached in that one.
Yeah, there are some GMs I have known who seem to forget that role playing is collaborative storytelling, and you wind up sitting there just listening to their story because everybody else is doing things that are cooler than you are.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Yeah, I mean,
but,
the quality of GMing is very important, and I think one of the most important skills a GM has to have, a good GM, is awareness of their players' involvement in the game. And you've got to have that empathy. You've got to understand where a player is getting excluded, either because of the subject matter or simply because their character can't do anything at this point.
Yeah.
And I've seen GMs running hard time adventures which have excluded characters basically, and players have had absolutely nothing to do.
I would absolutely say you've hit the point of what I would consider necessarily. Now, sorry, Josh mentioned in the text, and I think it does bear saying we are possibly going to venture into some mature themes tonight, so people at home might want to be aware of that.
It's going to get much more mature from once we stop talking about gore. It will get a lot worse. So
yeah, well, gore thing. But anyway, I would genuinely say going too far. I don't think, depending on genre, that violence can get too far, because violence is kind of a shorthand in role-playing games. I can't remember who it was, there was a guy who said that violence in comics is a shorthand for conflict, and I would say the same applies for a lot of role-playing games. Not all of them, but a lot of them. But I think when you start taking agency away from players in a way which is controlling, then perhaps you're approaching it. And I mean, I know certain games are actually based around that concept. Like, for example, I've actually got it, My Life with Master. It's a game where you essentially you all go together and you build a character who is the main NPC of the game, whose job is to torment you. Your characters have no ability to resist what this character wants. And that is a game and a psychic experiment, and I think it's actually been described as the only role-playing game which requires a safe word. Make of that what you will. Yeah. But that can happen in a lot of games. Sorry, I'm going on there.
Well, I was just saying, I think one you've done as well, so you've introduced another area where, player agency, where there's a question of how far do you go, and, people have different limits. One of the key things, if you're gaming for, you want to do this style of game where you do want to explore things which are a bit touchy to some people, is you've got to establish the ground rules. You've got to make people feel safe and confident in that environment, and that very much comes down to the GM. Now, one of the things we do, when we're running demo games of 66, because these are almost always groups of strangers who haven't played before and we don't know each other often, we always have a discussion beforehand about, basically taking the movie type rating system. What sort of things do we consider acceptable? Like in sort of movie reviews, contains mild violence, mild sex, sort of things. We just have a conversation about that, just to set the tone of the game, because that gives everyone a chance to chip in. And if people do want us to tone it down or ramp it up, we've got that chance to discuss it rather than making assumptions. The other important strategy you can use in these situations is the X card. And these are a great idea from storytelling games, where basically everybody has just a piece of card with literally an X on it. And if the game at any point veers into something they are personally uncomfortable with, they just have to lift the X card up. No one has to say anything, no one has to explain why, but it's up to everybody to then move away from the current subject matter. And so it's a way of, without getting involved with the whats and the whys, which can be very personally painful, you can flag up your concern, and the game can quickly adapt and move on until everyone stays involved.
I like that idea. I mean, the card itself is actually just a prop in that case, because the use of the card is essentially the group agrees that you can just put your hand up and say no, and nobody can query you. So the card is a prop. But I like that general idea, and this can be very handy in con games. And there's been a couple of instances where that would have actually been very useful, because I've run into, it was one game, it was IndieCon last year actually, where I did have to call no, and that was where the GM seemed to expect me to go blow by blow into a sex scene with an NPC.
Yeah,
that was my face as well, and I just thought, and I said, can we just draw a veil over that? And I had to say that a couple of times before he went, actually, yeah, okay, we'll draw a veil. I thought, Jesus Christ, man, what are you expecting me to do? Because I'd never met him before. This was a convention game. I was with 6 other complete bloody strangers. Now, it had been established this was going to be a bit edgy, but that's not edgy. That's in the great void off the edge of the cliff. So...
yeah, that's... I mean, I have often used kind of sexual themes in my games, especially horror games, but never actually asked somebody to describe themselves having intercourse with somebody else.
That's the thing. I mean, that really is the hard note. And what I think is really interesting about in gaming, and it kind of comes out in a lot of our rest of our society and culture as well, in that we get much more icky about sex than we do violence. So I was quite happy to go through descriptions of me gutting people and ripping their spines out. But in terms of having sex with someone, no, none of that. It's very simple. We have that kind of approach. You see it in film ratings as well. One bare bum gets you a 15, but you can kill 100 people.
Yeah, I think it's noteworthy that, I mean, it must be commented on that we are 4 males here. And the first thing we considered discussing, but going too far, was violence, about gore. And I think that sort of says something both, culturally and also about role-playing games, is that is like the language we use. We just accept it, and actually it's the games which don't have violence and gore in which are seen as the exception. So yeah, I think you're right, Mark, that there's a very different sense about sex to violence.
I suppose it's because it also be constructed as it seems to be the easy part of it. This is a very, very big topic for roleplay discussion. So I mean, it seems as it's easy enough to talk about violence, it's probably the easiest way to get into the subject. Once we've got into the subject, we can just spread out from there. So we're much more comfortable talking about flesh slaves, and then we can go, and then there's sex afterwards. I suppose this also, none of us really want to look like massive perverts by starting this whole meeting going, sex in role-playing games. How far is too far? That's just going to make us look terrible. We're trying to look partially professional, so we want to be stuff for something else.
But I mean, this is the thing: is that not us shying away from going too far?
That's true. Especially we also discuss as a DM, what are your hard limits? I mean, I myself am quite uncomfortable doing anything sexual in my games. I've only been DMing myself for the best part of 6 months now. I've always been forever a player. So I mean, eventually it might get to the point where I just won't bat an eyelid about it. But right now, as myself, I just can't bring myself to do it. I feel really awkward.
There's a big difference between having sexual themes in the game or having NPCs there which player characters can get into sexual relationships with, and that's been quite common. I mean, the Pathfinder game we're playing is a monthly one. We're actually playing an all-female party. We're a mixed male-female group. We're playing an all-female party, so we actually gender bend quite a lot with the characters we play. And it's quite common for someone in the group, at some point, when we go into a tavern, someone go, I find a nice boy and I chat him up. And they're usually a case of, okay, you find someone, we do that, that's all done. So sex does turn up in the games, but it only gets really awkward, I think, when you just try and say, and now how do you do it?
This is the thing, it's about taking away agency, because if you go up to somebody and you say, I want to have sex with this NPC, and they go, okay, describe yourself having sex with this NPC. Okay. But, actually, this might be a step down, but I think it bears mentioning that PCs can do it too, because I run a monthly game of Labyrinth Lore. We play it once a month, and for 2 of the players, it's their only game. They're not big role players; they just play with me essentially, and in one of those games, one of the characters, who is an illusionist in Labyrinth Lord, illusionist, and he cast a love spell on 2 of the other player characters.
Ooh,
Yeah, that's the noise that I made.
that's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's one rule I've taken throughout my years of role playing from all the DMs I've been with is messing directly with other players is a big no-no. And that's another subject of going too far. Is how far do you let a person interfere with a party? I know I've been reading stories on the internet. People go, "Oh, this person's cast this spell on this PC or this thing." So I don't agree with you in character, so I'm going to forcefully use a persuasion check to make you change your mind. And then because I succeeded at that persuasion check, you now have to think this.
I think that's a bit of a problem in the system and with the game. If you can dice roll to make someone change the way they play their character, that is entirely internal to them. I mean, I've used a bit of mind-affecting magic in Pathfinder because it's there, but that's usually been on the lines of during a fight, someone will put a charm spell on one of the players and say, "You don't want to fight me anymore," and that's been generating role play, but it's never in the case of another player. Because the sort of physical equivalent of doing the mind effect spells or that love spell in Pat's example is rogues stealing off other players, for example. Now, I've had a player do that, and I told him not to do it again because there's no other way that the barbarian can respond other than smack, I kill you, have some of that, and it breaks the game. But so what happened with the one with the love spell then?
I ruled it differently. Basically, I knew exactly what he was trying to do. He was trying to get 2 of the other players' characters to get. Now, to be fair, these characters had a relationship which was veering towards the romantic. It was kind of a running joke almost. And he went, "Oh, I'm going to cast a love spell on them," and I was like, "No, clearly they don't want to step this far." So I had it that one of them fell for the other one, and the other one fell for a random tavern wench, who then ran away. So basically they had a chase, a kind of Benny Hill style chase around the town until it wore off because they were never going to catch up with each other. I was never going to allow this to happen, especially since one of them was like a half orc, and if it had gotten into a kind of situation, it might have gotten a bit, so yeah, no, avoid that at all costs.
There are games which explore character agency and what you can do, and to a certain extent, it's a sliding scale, of all role-playing games, how much agency you have. And so then think games like Fate allow you, the GM, to dictate certain things, or Powered by the Apocalypse type games allow you to sort of like who decides the outcome of a particular situation is decided by the dice roll. And so, but those are games where you go in, that's the structure of the game, there's an assumption in the game that you have lost a certain amount of agency. Whereas games like Pathfinder, it's very much about you control your character, absolutely. In fact, it's about the only thing in the game you do control. Yeah. So you want to hold on to that.
Things like Call of Cthulhu, for example, or 66 Look necessary, they are built around kind of not. I don't actually think. I was going to say they're built around removing agency, but they're not really, are they? They're built around removing victory, which is a different thing. But it's interesting to note, Savage Worlds, to drop a name, is I was actually going to just bring that up, Josh. It has in its mechanics, it says you can't use persuasion rolls or tests of will against another player character, which kind of works until they actually include as a legendary level edge the ability to use those on another player character. Which is a bit strange. It goes, oh, you can't tell other people what to do and that just have them do it until you reach later levels, which is a bit strange.
So let's move it on a little bit, and we've talked about violence and gore, and also about sex in role-playing games, and also agency. But what about the broad subject matter? There's a lot of the storytelling games which really go into different subject matter. I'm thinking of games like Sail Away Jordan, which is where you play slaves, or I forget the name of the game, it's a Japanese name game, but where you actually play 6 female slaves to a samurai lord, and the GM is the samurai lord, and they're deliberately exploring gender roles and race roles and things like that. And so, just thoughts on sort of like subject matter. Is there some subject matter we should never touch on in a role-playing game?
I think games often veer away from that when they don't necessarily need to. For example, yeah, let's avoid that. For example, the one I was thinking of is Deadlands. One of my favourites. One of my favourite role-playing games, Deadlands. Specifically has written in its backstory that essentially that the sexual liberation and civil rights all came far much earlier in their world, and even though it's 1880, women and minorities are seen as being on the same level as everyone else, which is kind of fine. But then if you look at Victoriana is a lot of that is based entirely around class and race, and that is, even so, it's kind of pulpy. But the idea is that your character, it goes, yes, there's a racial divide, yes, there's a class divide. You have to do something about it. That's what your characters are here for. That's kind of what the game is about. That goes from another dimension.
I think that's a good way of using it, because you can use it as a source of roleplay or creating a framework about the world for the players to roleplay in. It's certainly in terms of go do something about this, but also you can say, okay, well, you're from different classes and there's tension there. That simply sets the kind of challenges you're up against. You use it to build up the conflict and things in the game. It's quite handy. There's only kind of really one bad point where you suppose only one bad way you can use that is when essentially an NPC turns around to a player and just gives them racial abuse because it's considered right in the world. For example, you can't do that.
Yeah.
I think that's, well, I'll say, say you can't do that. I think that's using something like race or class wrongly as a GM, and certainly wrongly as a narrative tool.
Yeah, I think it's important, and Lovecraft is a great example, in that where you have race and class issues in a historic setting, you have that choice. One, you can just ignore them all and say it's a 21st century world, equal rights, but blah blah blah. And to be honest, very few games suffer if you do that, and I'd say any group in any doubt, just do that. But if you do want to have that thing, especially say if you're playing class-based, it's generally easier and more socially acceptable to do it, where you have poor characters you can't get into the gentleman's club. It's important that the GM doesn't end up excluding the player from the game. If they can't get into the banquet, then they must be able to get into the servants' quarter and play an equal part of the game, albeit in possibly a different way. And that's the GM's responsibility, to make sure everybody stays engaged with the game.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah. So it's you can use that. Like I said, it's setting up framework. It kind of sets different paths you can take and puts pluses and minuses on the characters and what they can and can't do. I mean, playing with something like race or gender is not something I've done really much as a GM, and I've not encountered it very much. I mean, Pathfinder has different species in there, and therefore, and I think kind of built into there, you can put a bit of kind of stereotyping of how gnomes see elves or how elves see dwarves and all of that jazz. So you can do fantasy racism, as it were. That's good. I've had to use that before, where they've gone to an elven country where the elves have been highly dismissive of anybody else, but that's just kind of set challenges. But I've never designed a game around the concept of using race as a roleplay point.
I think it's easier with fantastic races anyway. If you're doing it like that and you're going, oh well, you're a dwarf, so you're not allowed up to the manor.
There's no historical concept to catch someone on.
Yeah, there's no, because I mean, we did actually run a game. I ran a game set in the Marvel universe once, and one of the characters was a mutant, and basically they got into a situation where the police showed. He'd basically accidentally. It's a role-playing game. They got into a big fight with some other mutants, and one of them was killed. And he immediately, in character, did a very good job because they were only supposed to be kids. And then I was like, well, they're going to arrest you, and then you're going to go to jail. And he was like, well, I'll get a trial, and I'll get this. And I was like, yes, but you're a mutant in this world. You will go to jail. It's not a world built around that. So it's doing it with fantasy races is okay. But I think if I said to a player, your character is black, for example, therefore you're going to go to jail, it might not be entirely uncharacteristic of what might actually happen in certain countries, but it's not something you want to have to happen in a game. It doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, it touches on lots of issues, some cultural boundaries, but also, again, agency and things like that about the player. I mean, I think it's worth noting, as we're all white guys here from the UK, we are not the best people to talk about necessarily race and gender role playing. We're obviously come from a very specific position. But I don't think that sort of excludes us exploring, or any group exploring these issues. I think there's a onus on players and GMs to educate themselves about the subject matter, and that means going out there and finding information out, and also thinking about it, and then role playing it. Not everyone, from our background, we can't role play the racism and we can't understand all the issues, but that shouldn't let us try in good faith and to actually explore them and try to understand them and become, hopefully better people, at least more informed people through this gaming.
Yeah, I mean, there is an elephant in the room when we're talking about gender and role playing, and that is that, well, what I'm talking about, like kind of gamergaters, that kind of people that we get who in our line of thingy who feel that certain people shouldn't be invited, which is a terrible thing, terrible people, and shouldn't be allowed. But Josh,
sorry, which I think my response to all that stuff is largely to ignore it. The vocal people are just a minority. Actually, most gamers are really engaged and welcoming about the issue, and there's just some arseholes, and the best thing to do is just ignore those people.
It is true. It doesn't prevent there being a kind of a public perception, however.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, that's another talk for another time, I think.
Yes.
Josh mentioned earlier that, there is something in one of the books I got, Beasts
and Barbarians.
I'm not sure if we should actually be name dropping here, but
sorry.
That actually has an edge which is a hindrance. Savage Worlds works on edges and hindrances, called Damsel in Distress, which is kind of... I'm not sure if this hails back to what we were saying earlier. First of all, obviously, being damsel in distress, it's not exactly certainly very balanced and level. The writing, it says in it that male or female characters can take it, but then suggests that it is more suitable to female characters, which is inexcusable, to be honest.
What does the hindrance do, though?
It basically means that rather than killing you, bad guys will try to capture you.
I think you also get minuses to fighting and shooting.
Yeah, and you get minuses to fighting and ability and warding people away. And the same one actually has another female-only edge, which says that you can move faster if you wear high heels. So I'm not sure how kind of tongue-in-cheek that is.
Bizarre. I mean, I think tongue-in-cheek is a key word there, because you can use that stuff and play with it.
Yeah.
You can play with the tropes in order to generate, say, humour and to kind of guide roleplay. And there was one game which I saw as a LARP, actually, saw advertised, but unfortunately didn't get to, called Aliens and Alienation, in the mold of Sense and Sensibility. So you're playing Jane Austen characters being attacked by Ridley Scott's aliens.
Amazing.
But for example, one of the flaws you could take on there is a female character was swooning. So when you get certain damage calls, you have to faint. But again, with that one, that's all playing on tropes. If this is the cliche of what women were like then, and they swoon in the Austen novels, and this is the cliche of what men were like then, so you do that. I think as long as you do that stuff kind of tongue-in-cheek, then essentially you're taking the piss out of the sexism of the previous era.
It's potentially, I mean, if you're basing something on a pulp thing and that's something that happened, then saying, yes, this is something that happened in that kind of thing isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. I just think, leaving that aside for a moment, it was interesting what we were saying about agency earlier. Because if you're going, I want my character to be a character who gets kidnapped all the time, are you essentially volunteering to have your agency removed so that other people can have something to do coming to rescue you?
I think it's one of those things where that's a hindrance or an edge, which would only really come up in extremis. It's when you've absolutely stuffed the fight, you get to live. If you're absolutely cocked up, you don't die, and you just generate roleplay for people coming to get you. It's sort of a get-out-of-jail-free card, and that's what they could have called it, actually, mechanically. They didn't have to call it damsel in distress. They couldn't just call it get-out-of-jail-free, or take this one alive, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think that's careful.
Making it sound like a sexist thing when it actually really didn't have to be.
Yeah, this is things you have to be careful about tropes, because tropes, by their nature, embody certain cultural ideas. And yes, you can use them tongue-in-cheek or to illustrate their stupidity. But you do have to be careful about them. You have to think about them. And Mark, you're absolutely right that you could rewrite it to that power without that gender bias. And I think it's just bad writing.
Absolutely.
To do it, to say, just victim or something like that. Any number of things would make it a gender neutral edge. Okay, I think we're we're coming up to 8 o'clock. So, any last thoughts about too far? How far is too far?
I had a thought earlier when I was talking about the flesh slaves, and I'm hoping none of my party are actually watching this because this is a spoiler for what's going to happen in the next session. But I introduced them to some NPCs just like the last session and made them really nice. And when they finally get back from the dungeon they've just done, because they get out and it's night time, and they have to go stay at this place because they're not going to stay in the wilderness, it's too dangerous. They're going to find that the cult that have been following the Flayer have found this farmstead and are busy turning the people inside into what's known as a flesh totem, which is like a bigger, nastier version of the flesh slaves. There's like 3 or 4 people just stitched together. The point behind it is, how far do you torture your players? I mean, I'm making them like these NPCs, and then I'm just taking them away. I'm breaking their hearts. How sadistic can the DM be before the players go, no, screw you, I'm not playing with you anymore. I'm not playing because I don't want to get too attached to any NPCs, just have everything under the sun horrible happen to them.
I think it's a question of frequency with that example, rather than amplitude, or rather than extent. Because you can do that really horrible thing, as long as you don't do it every time they meet someone nice, because then it just kind of breaks. They will never like anyone. They will never trust you. They'll never do it. It's something that you hit them with once, or you do it like once a year, really infrequently. Otherwise, it will just become, oh great, we're seeing nice people. Oh well, they're going to die. They're going to get turned to flesh totem again, or something worse. So I think that sets the limit on how far you can go with that one. But then I'm thinking that it's in terms of a narrative tool, rather than in terms of people going, oh, I hate this, and leaving the game. I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. I think that's the conclusion we're reaching so far, is that there isn't really, there's no limit. Talk to your group first and find out what it is.
But very much, the thing is, too far. How far is too far is an entirely personal thing, and it can be situational. What you're happy to do in one game on one night might not be what you're happy to do on the next week. So it's very much that if you're going to do anything which veers even slightly away from the mainstream safe areas, talk to your people, establish confidence amongst all the players to be able to speak up or indicate their discomfort, and everyone to respect that and move on without making it important, making it significant.
So is there anywhere fundamentally a game can't go? Because I tend towards the idea of games as art. If you can paint a picture of anything, you can make a film of anything covering any point, then surely it should be possible to make a game of anything.
I absolutely agree.
It's something we've specifically not spoken about here, but there must be a way of covering it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you were hitting the nail on the head. Games are art, and art can explore any subject matter. You can explore it badly in a crass and inappropriate way, and you can explore it extremely well. The onus on us as writers and GMs is to do our best to explore it well. We're about out of time, so we'll stop there. I think we could talk about this for ages and ages and ages. It's a always fascinating topic. Josh, very quickly, I can see you're so keen.
I would just say, as with all pieces of art, it's subjective. I can think of a few things off the top of my head right now that I don't want explored that won't be said in the meeting. So again, with everything, it's all subjective.
Okay, thank you very much, Josh. Let's very quickly do some pluses and deltas. Josh, I believe you're doing those.
It is me. All right, Chris, plus and a delta, please.
Plus, it was interesting to do something different, a very different format from our normal think tanks. So that was great. I liked it. I think we can explore this format and do similar discussions in future weeks. Delta. It would have been nice to have certainly a better gender mix, if nothing else, in the group. It's just fallen this week that people are ill or away or whatever, and we ended up with 4 white guys with beards. So that was unfortunate, but that will be my delta.
Okie dokie. Mark, how about you?
It's good to talk about a whole range of interesting things, because this is a subject I've only thought about when I've stumbled across it in terms of, holy crap, that's too far, rather than to really kind of suss out. So it's interesting to kind of chew over my own thoughts for that. Another good point is how we were able to conduct this conversation without using the pinging mechanism and just talk to each other like natural people. So I think that's worked very well, and we're getting better at this whole online chatting thing. As a delta, I think we could do with chewing over it a bit more. I think it's half an hour isn't really long enough to have the conversation. I think we will probably also have a lot more stories and examples of what's too far and what wasn't and things like that. So that's pretty much it. Although I have tried to avoid being beardist throughout the entire thing. I don't think we said anything particularly gonophobic.
Pat, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with Mark for my delta. There was a lot more I think could have been said, and I also agree with Chris. We are 4 white guys, and the conversation inevitably got round to stuff that maybe 4 white guys aren't going to suss out in half an hour on the internet. But yeah, I have to say I like this kind of more relaxed style of meeting. I think yeah, that's my plus. I like this. This is good.
Especially also mentioned Delta, your technical issues. I mean, technically you are a Smurf now, right?
Yeah, that is right. I am now blue.
Don't beat me to it. Alright, seriously though. My pluses and deltas. I always love talking about role-playing as a whole broad subject. I think we should do more of these meetings, maybe like once a month or so. Just dedicate a meeting to the general roleplay. I can't think of the word, it's tip of my bloody tongue. But you know what I mean. What the hell was that? Just a burst of static. Anyway, rambling. Deltas, yeah, we could do with some more people, though this small amount of people is probably good for this more relaxed atmosphere. And that it's starting to drop really temperature-wise. I'm really cold. So I'll pass back on to Chris for the signing off. Chris, remember to remind people to subscribe, damn it.
Yes, remind people to subscribe. I still managed to forget to do it at the beginning because I'm an idiot. So if you have watched this far, then do subscribe. There's more of this stuff. Every week, just about. So that's it for this week about going too far. Next week we'll be back to the normal format of brainstorming, where we'll knock around ideas for something. Don't know what yet. We'll work that out in the week. So until then, bye-bye, and bye-bye from me, and bye-bye from all of them. Bye-bye.
Bye.